Hi guys, for those of you who are continuing with Fahrenheit 451, I wanted to offer a little bit of commentary on the last part of the assigned reading, and I'm not going to go quite as line by line, but what is really important and what stands out in this next section is the amazing contrast between Clarice and Montag's interaction with her, and then when Guy returns home. And it's important especially to notice the difference between the attitudes of Clarice and then Mildred, who is Guy Montag's wife. So we start off right with this description of coming home. And it says, it was like coming into the cold marbled room of a mausoleum after the moon has set. Complete darkness, not a hint of the silver world outside. The windows tightly shut, the chamber a tomb world where no sound from the great city could penetrate. Right? So immediately, right, he keeps talking about the life and the vivacity of Clarice, and then coming home, right, feels like death, feels like coming into a tomb, feels like coming into a mausoleum, and yet it is not completely dead. Right? It says the room was not empty, the little mosquito delicate dancing hum in the air, the electrical murmur. So there is still energy, there is still a type of life, but it's not, right, the warm candle, it's this electrical humming. And we see his reaction, this amazing imagery, right? His smile slides away like tallow skin, the stuff of a fantastic candle collapsing. And there's almost a resentment towards Clarice because he'd worn his happiness like a mask. And now Clarice has stripped that mask away and made him aware of how miserable his current existence really is. And we get this very interesting description of his wife. And he alludes to, remember, this is science fiction. This is a prediction of what the future could be like. And so rather than saying exactly what's going on, he uses these descriptions to reflect how technology has sort of taken control. It says his wife stretched on the bed, uncovered and cold like a body displayed on the lid of a tomb, her eyes fixed to the ceiling by invisible threads of steel immovable. So you picture, right, his woman lying flat, and there are these wires coming down from the ceiling and covering her eyes with sort of these steel goggles, and in her ears are called seashells, right? These thimble radios that are clamped into her ears. So everything, all of her senses are completely enraptured, encircled, taken over by these electronic voices, the electronic visions. And it's interesting, the seashell choice, because it talks about, right, the waves came in and bore her off, and their great tides of sound floating her toward morning. There was no night in the last 2 years that Mildred had not swum in that sea, had not gone down it for the third time. So of course the idea of going down for the third time is an imagery usually associated with drowning. So Mildred has given into, has completely been drowned in this ocean of technology, essentially. And skipping down, right, there's this hint at, it says, an instant before his foot hit the object on the floor, he knew he would hit such an object. The object gave a dull clink and slid off in the darkness. He doesn't tell us what this is, but there's that hint, that pinprick of foreshadowing. There's something on the ground that should not be there, and There's a dull dread that Montag feels that this is not something he has not dealt with before. And yet there is a dull clink and a feeling of anticipation, but not unlike his meeting with Clace, not a pleasant anticipation. And a few paragraphs later, we see what that object is. The object he had sent tumbling with his foot now glinted under the edge of his own bed, the small crystal bottle of sleeping tablets which earlier today had been filled with tiny capsules and which now lay uncapped and empty in the light of the tiny flare. So he's come home and he finds this empty bottle of sleeping pills and his wife lying there completely motionless on this slab as if she were dead. And as he's staring at his wife, there's these fighter jets come shooting overhead, and Montag feels it all the way in his core, and it's sort of his scream and his situation matches the scream of the jet planes. And once the planes have finished, he's able to recenter himself, and he calls 911 to deal with his wife, who obviously has overdosed on these sleeping pills. And the next excerpt is very impersonal. There's this these two machines, and one goes down into your stomach and apparently pumps your stomach for you, right? Sucks out all of the poison. And the operators are acting like this is no big deal, right? They're smoking cigarettes, they're just kind of hanging out as this woman is being pulled back from death. And the other machine, right? So one pumps all the poison out, and then the other machine, right, pumps all of the blood out and recycles it. And the operator points out, right, that this is a two-step process, right? That if you do not only take the poison out, but put the good stuff in, which is sort of a symbolism in its own right, you can't just stop doing bad habits. You have to replace it with something new and good, or the effects of the effects of that poison continue to be felt. And they're talking right, about his wife, and so Montag says, "Stop it," and the operators kind of shrugs, "I'm just saying." And they're done. They charge him $50, and Montag asks, "Why didn't you send a doctor?" And the operator's response is, "This happens all the time, right? This is not something new. This is not even something to be worried about. The idea that people are, killing themselves or nearly killing themselves on a regular basis is just part of this new world." And so the operators leave. They have another call to make, and they take their poison that they have pumped out and go on their merry way. And the next day, Mildred seems completely, skipping ahead a little bit, oblivious, right? She is surprised at how hungry she is. She completely misinterprets why she's feeling hungry. She wonders if maybe they had a party or something, and hopes she didn't make a fool of herself. And initially, Guy is even willing to sort of let it go, sort of play along with it. Even in the morning, the first thing she wakes up, right, she has her earphones in again. She's already engaged in this mechanical other world, even to the point where she doesn't even stop her listening to engage with her husband, right, to engage with Guy. She just reads his lips and responds to that. And finally, he decides he can't let it go, right? And he says, "You took all the pills in your bottle last night." And she's like, "Oh, I wouldn't do that." Right? And um, guy tries to brush it off. It's like, "Well, maybe you just forgot. You just kept taking your pills and taking your pills because you're so wrapped up in this other world of yours, this world of technology, that it all became a blur." And that sort of harkens back to his conversation with Clarice, where she was talking about how, the billboards are now 200 miles long because people are rushing by so much. Everything's a blur, and they don't stop to appreciate or even notice the basic things. And Montag's wife is so wrapped up in her world, she can't even notice when she's overdosed on sleeping pills. So the part of the chapter that sort of completes where a guy is trying to engage with his wife, who we already have a sense that they don't seem to have a super loving, affectionate relationship. And she's so excited because she is able to participate in um, this play. And she says there's a play on the wall-to-wall circuit, and she's interacting with the characters on the screen. And we know from this, right, all three of their four walls, so three of their four walls are covered with, we think we have full screen TVs. Their entire wall is a screen. And, rather than going outside and interacting with people, she's engaging with this virtual world, this script that she's participating in. And when Guy asks her what the play's about, it's not about anything. Right? She just says there are these people named Bob and Ruth and Helen, and it's so fun. When are we going to get a fourth wall? So now we can just be purely surrounded by these screens. And earlier, of course, we saw a guy staring at the blank wall, and that was almost a centering thing for him. And Mildred wants to take anything natural away. She doesn't seem at all concerned that the $2,000 is a third of Guy's salary. And she even accuses him, right, of being selfish and not thinking of her. And then she completely turns her back on him. She just says goodbye. And because she has her script to get to, she has her artificial world to get to. So we will continue with the rest of this chapter, but I want you to really stop and think about just up to this point. And of course, we have another encounter with Clarice right after this. What kind of world does Clarice represent versus what Mildred seems to represent? And the fact that this is what Mildred is engaged in seems to be the normal, and what Clarice does is considered abnormal, even crazy, and in some cases, in the case of her uncle, even criminal. So what is Bradbury trying to convey to us by having these two very different women in Guy's life?